All right, our next video here is going to be about rhombuses. Now, again, similar to the rectangle, a rhombus is a parallelogram, but it is a special type of parallelogram. So it's going to have all the properties of a parallelogram, but it's going to have some extra ones. So kind of if you remember that map from the beginning, if this is our parallelogram, a rectangle is a special type, and a rhombus is a different type of parallelogram. And then later, we have another shape that they both are. So they're both different types of quadrilaterals. They're both considered parallelograms, but they have some extra things that make them special or that make them different. So, again, in this video, we're going to talk about angle properties in a rhombus, finding missing sides, missing angles in a rhombus, and then comparing those two properties. All right, those are going to be some multiple choice questions. You'll have that in the practice section. The Regents loves multiple choice questions comparing quadrilaterals. All right, so here are our rhombus properties. Now, because it's a parallelogram, we start with these same 5 properties of a parallelogram. This is why in the first video I told you how important it is to memorize these 5 properties. They're super, super important, and they make memorizing the other shapes easier. So here are the 3 additional properties of a rhombus. So 1, it has 4 congruent sides. Not just opposite sides congruent, it has all 4. So these 4 congruent sides would look kind of like this. All right, another way that you might see it written down is that consecutive sides are congruent. Right, that's another way it can be written down. This one, diagonals bisect the vertices. So if you have a diagonal here, it means that these angles are going to be the same. These vertex angles get bisected. All right, that comes up when solving for missing angles. You'll see that in one of the examples down below. And then lastly, diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, so again, down here, if we draw 2 diagonals, we get right angles on the inside, right angles here. And that's why it says rhombus is composed of 4 congruent right triangles, talking about these right triangles here. All right. So again, the big difference between the rhombus and the rectangle is the diagonals. The diagonals in the rhombus are perpendicular and they bisect the vertices, whereas the diagonals in a rectangle are congruent. That's the key difference that you have to remember. All right, we're going to get right into 3 examples using these 3 properties. So, first question, in rhombus ABCD with diagonals at AC and DB, AD is 10. They have that marked for us already right here. That says the length of the diagonal AC. So AC is this whole thing. That is 12. Find the length of DB. So we want to find the length of the whole thing. Now, if this was a rectangle, we wouldn't really have to do any work because we know the diagonals are the same length. So we need to talk about 2 things here. 1, we have to use the property from the parallelogram. So we're going to use the parallelogram property that diagonals bisect each other. So we're going to use that property here because if this whole thing is 12, then I know that these 2 parts must also be 6. All right, that's very important for this question. The next thing that we're going to use or that we're going to talk about is in a rhombus, the diagonals are perpendicular. That means that I have right angles all in these spots. So now, how does that help me? How does that help me get closer to figuring out what the length of this diagonal is? Well, what we're going to use is we are going to use this right triangle here in order to help us find this piece over here. If we can find this piece over here, we can find the length of the entire diagonal because we know that it's bisected. So that triangle that we have, or I should say that right triangle that we have here, right, there is a 10 here, there's a 6 here, and what we're looking for is going to be over here. This is set up for us to use Pythagorean theorem, this being my hypotenuse. So I always fill in my hypotenuse first. Then I would have x squared plus 6 squared. We're going to get x squared plus 36 equals 100. Subtract the 36. X squared equals 64. And square root both sides. We get x equals 8. Now, unfortunately, this is not the final answer. This x here that we just found is really just this question mark, which is 8. Now, we don't just want this piece. We don't just want this piece right here. We want the whole thing. So again, we know that the whole thing, since it's bisected, if this side is 8, this side is 8, and then it has to be 16. So 16 here is going to wind up being our final answer. All right, so again, the key to this question is mixing those parallelogram properties with our rhombus properties. We have diagonals bisecting each other. We have that in a rhombus, diagonals are perpendicular. Get a little Pythagorean theorem in here, and we can solve from there. So there's a lot of different things. There's a lot of different ways that these properties work together. All right, go on to our next question. Given ABCD is a rhombus, solve for the measure of angle CBD. So ABCD is a rhombus. Remember, when I see this, it means I have all the properties. I get to pick which ones I want to use, which ones I think will be helpful. Well, if I'm looking for angle CBD, I'm looking for an angle. What I kind of want to use, what I think that we should use here, is that all 4 sides are congruent in a rhombus. I know that all 4 of these are the same. Because now, when I do that, I have this triangle here, which now we can see it's an isosceles triangle. So if this main angle is 100, I know that these 2 angles have to be the same. So I would do 180 minus 100, get 80, and then I have to split it up amongst those 2 congruent angles so they both wind up being 40 degrees. All right, and that's it for that question. But again, knowing which property to use, having all the different properties at your disposal is what's important. You have to have them memorized in order to do some of these questions, right? Last one. In the diagram below, MATH is a rhombus. Again, rhombus tells me I can use all of the properties, or I'm probably going to use the properties. It's got HAM as 12, which is this little angle in here. It's kind of tough to see. And it wants to know what AMT is, which is this angle here. Again, the property that I would probably use, the one that I would want to use, is that diagonals are perpendicular. That gives me this right angle here. So if you can see it, we have a nice little right triangle here that we can use. So if I think about that right triangle, I know that this is 12, I know that this is 90, and I know that this is kind of what I'm looking for. And we know our triangle rules. All 3 angles in a triangle have to make 180. So we could do 12 plus 90, which is 102. And then we would do 180 minus 102, which would give us 78 for the angle that we're looking for. All right, that's it for rhombuses. They got those 3 extra properties. Make sure you're studying your properties. Make sure you have them memorized. We got a bunch of practice questions down here for video 5. So you can get onto them in the next packet and get ready for your 5-question mastery check.